You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hey there, music fans. You have tuned into the Modern Musicology podcast. Thank you for joining us today. We have author and journalist Rob Levy.
Hey.
Drummer, singer-songwriter Stephanie Seymour.
Hello, everyone.
My name is Alan Seiler. I am an author and publisher and drummer. And we are joined by a very special guest today. Now, I know at the end of our last episode, we promised you that we would be talking about the Indigo Girls documentary this week, but I did say, unless the schedule changes, and the schedule did change. And we have a very, very special guest joining us for a second visit.
Yay.
This is author Richard Evans, the author of Listening to the Music the Machines Make, Inventing Electric Pop, 1978 to 1983. So we first had Mr. Evans on toward the end of 2022 when the book first came out in hardcover. It's now just come out in paperback, and we are absolutely thrilled to have a second conversation with Mr. Evans. Richard, how are you today?
I'm really good. Thank you ever so much for having me back on again, and apologies to anyone who has tuned in with the expectation of hearing about the Indigo Girls.
So the book originally came out toward the end of 2022. I think it was October, but I'm not remembering. And we're now toward the end of 2024. And that's a long span from release of hardcover to release of paperback. Usually those things run from like 6 months to a year, unless the book is selling really well in hardcover. The publisher is not going to stop sales on that to put out the paperback. So I'm assuming the book has done extremely well over the past 2 years, which is really exciting.
Well, I think it has. And I think it's like you have to sort of decide whose version of done well you're going to go with. And my version of done well is the fact that it was published in the first place at all. And the fact that it's out there, and I've actually seen it in bookshops, and people have sent me pictures of their bookshelves with the book on it. And that sort of like feels like an absolutely massive success. But you're right in that the book came out in hardback and is now just dropped in paperback in the US. And the reason it was supposed to be, I think the paperback was supposed to be next year, and they were going to run with the hardback, but then they started to realize they were running out of hardbacks, which does indicate to me that they're selling them to someone somewhere. And so therefore, you know, from a publisher's point of view, as well as from my own personal point of view, it does seem like it's been doing well, which is unbelievably exciting.
Can I just ask this is probably a really dumb question, but how do they, obviously it's sales or whatever, but like, how do they decide we're going to now put the paperback out, but we're not going to make any more hardcovers? Do they never make any more hardcovers? What happens?
Excellent question, and not one that I can answer with any sense of authority.
I can say that typically the hardcover stays on the shelf until the paperback comes out, and then the hardcover goes out of print.
It does.
I actually think that at the start of the project, when I signed the deal and I submitted the book and all that sort of thing, at the start of the project, I asked about a paperback, and at that point, they actually weren't sure that they would even do one. Because sometimes they just keep books in hardback, and they just sort of like just tick over in their own lane. But I think, and I hope I'm right, and it's a version of events that suits me. I think it sold well enough that they thought actually there might be a market here to put it into a paperback. And so rather than doing an additional print run in a hardback, they would put it into a paperback and potentially, I guess, get a whole new market of people interested.
And when they put a paperback out, do they target new countries that maybe the hardcover didn't go to at first?
As far as I'm aware, it's less scientific than that, because I think that once the book exists, then I think it's kind of available everywhere.
Right.
They tell me that it's available everywhere. So, it's
Yeah.
like, I like to think that if I was walking down the street in China, I could just pop into the local music bookshop and there it would be, on the shelf,
Right.
just waiting for me. Whether that's actually true or not, I don't know. But it's a good fantasy from my point of view.
What's been great about the book is just randomly between traveling, deep diving for radio shows and journalism stuff, I keep happening across the book just sort of like by happenstance. Can you kind of talk about just how the book's been received? I know it's been out there and it's obviously doing well, but like, have you gotten any critics that you're like, that guy likes my book, he hates everything, or just really surprising things about how the book was received?
Yeah, there's been some brilliant moments actually. First of all, it's been absolutely brilliant fun. So I think I mentioned last time I was on the show that writing a book, it turns out to me, who hadn't written a book before, it's really hard work.
Yeah.
And it takes a really long time and a lot of headspace. But publishing a book and putting it out there is great fun, because I get to talk to guys like you. It's like who share this sort of the same kind of interests that I do, and that's just a great thing to come out of it. So it's like I've done some interviews and I've met some people, but one of my magic moments, to sort of come back to Rob's question, was Karl Bartos from Kraftwerk. He is published by the same publisher that I'm published with, Omnibus Press, here in the UK. And I was privileged to meet him when he was doing an event for his book, which came out just before my one came out. And against all the odds, and this is absolutely brilliant, we've kept in touch.
Wow.
So it's like I've sort of made a new friend. And to come to that magic moment that I was sort of alluding to, Karl put a picture on his social media of him signing copies of his book in his studio. And in the background on his shelf, I can see my book.
Fantastic.
And I'm like, that's kind of like the ultimate thing, It's like,
Right.
how absolutely brilliant is that? And
That's great.
So has he read the book, and has he told you what he thought of the book, particularly your coverage of his band?
Well, he says he's read the book, and he was kind enough to provide a quote for the paperback edition, which I'm paraphrasing it now, but he says that something along the lines of, my thorough investigation of the subject highlights a fundamental humanity. Or something along those lines, which
Wow.
Very German.
yeah, which was absolutely lovely of him. So it's like I not only do I have a book that's published, I also have a book that's published with an endorsement from a member of Kraftwerk.
Right.
That's fantastic. So have you gotten more quotes and stuff for the paperback? How does that work too? Did you write an afterword or anything like that, or?
Yeah, the paperback is basically the same book. It's changed in a few places because people pointed out some factual inaccuracies in the things that I wrote about. But I think there's maybe only 2 pages where things have changed. So to my knowledge, it's probably still kind of okay. But we did, I approached a bunch of people who I sent the book to originally and asked them, if they liked it, then would they mind sort of, just putting a sentence together saying that they liked it? And I did get some great responses I got Vince Clarke and Andy Bell. That kind of goes without saying because they are my bosses, and they kind of have to support me. But they both did it. I got one from Daniel Miller, who runs Mute Records and signed Depeche Mode and was the producer of Depeche Mode and that sort of thing. Karl Bartos, as we mentioned. Soft Cell's Dave Ball, who was he said that he read it and liked it so much that there was things about Soft Cell that even he didn't know.
Oh, there you go.
Wow.
I'm not quite sure if that means that they're not true or not, but they're in the book. So he did. Rusty Egan, who used to be in Visage and ran the Blitz Club, he did a really nice one as well. Cool. And more recently, although it didn't come in time to be used on the book, Billy Curry from Ultravox said that
Nice.
he said that he was gripped by it, and I'm choosing to believe that's a good thing too.
That's great.
It's funny that you say that, that you asked people that read it and said, "Hey, if you like this, give me a blurb." I used to work for a small publishing company, and we had an author one time who actually used negative reviews as her blurbs because they were funny. And a lot of times it was like, one was a rejection letter from a different publisher that says, "This book is wonderful. It doesn't quite fit our, thing." But it was funny that she actually went that opposite route with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, had that been my experience, had I had those quotes come in, then I think I might well have been tempted to do something similar. but unfortunately, they came in and they were great.
Well, that's good in itself.
Has there been anyone that you either just sent the book to or just said, "Here, I love you. Here's a book about you"?
I did send it to Paul Humphreys from OMD. And Paul said that he would do a quote for it. But he was actually in the studio at the time working on the new OMD album. And so he actually didn't turn it around in time. And I would have loved to have had that one from him. Because they're such an essential part of the sort of the narrative. There's only a handful of bands who are there at the beginning of the book, who are still there at the end of the book.
Right.
And OMD are one of them. So,
well, what did you think of the new OMD record?
I really, really enjoyed it. It's like, I think that consistently OMD have been one of the bands with the best quality control across their entire career. And I thought it was a great little record. Yeah,
everything that I heard from it I loved.
Yeah. So apparently in advance of it all happening, Paul was locked in. He has a studio in his basement apparently at home, and he was basically locked in his basement for 3 months before he was allowed out to do anything else or talk to anyone else about anything.
I know you must be doing obviously in stores and stuff like that, and have you been doing any unusual kind of promotional events? And also, like, have you been going to different countries? How are the fans? Have you met any specifically, interesting fans and stuff like that?
The fans, I say fans, the readers, the people who have read it, it's like, it's so amazing that people have read it at all. That it sort of feels like such an amazing compliment that people have bought it and invested their time, and it's a lot of time, it's a lot of book to get through.
Yes.
And for people to sort of either contact me online or to come up to me when I've been out and about doing book things has been just a kind of mind-blowing, actually. People have been so kind. It's like I suspect that if they didn't like the book, they probably wouldn't have bothered saying anything. So I only sort of talked to the people who did like it. But no, it's been great, and I have done a few bits and pieces in promotion of it. Right back at the beginning of the hardback, I did a big London launch, and I had Martin Ware from the Human League and Heaven 17. He came with me and I interviewed him on stage about his role in electronic music. Yeah. Andy Bell from Erasure I did the same with him. So it was kind of like an afternoon of conversation with legends.
Wow.
And me.
And you did his podcast too, the Martin Ware podcast
as well, which was another highlight of this whole process. Was that because Martin had come along to do this launch event back when the hardback came out, we sort of got talking, and he had a book out at the same time, and we did another event together at a festival called Louder Than Words, which takes place every year in Manchester, and Martin and I did an event together at that. And again, Martin was someone I sort of knew a little bit before the book because our paths had crossed, a few times. But after the book, we sort of, talked and kept in touch. And like you say, he invited me to be part of his Electronically Yours podcast, which was a huge compliment because it's like, everyone who is anyone in electronic music has done this podcast, and I was so thrilled to be invited, and so we did it, and because we had so much to talk about, it actually became 2 episodes of the podcast, which was like just a double whammy of brilliant for me. That was a really great moment. Yeah.
That makes me think of the first time that we had you on. I felt like that could have happened with us too, because I felt like there was so much to discuss that we could easily have gone for 2 hours and done 2 episodes with you. And that was one of my favorite conversations that we've ever had on our show. So I'm really, really glad that we're able to get you on for a second time so we can actually do that second hour.
Yes, because I have more questions.
And I'm thrilled to be on, because I absolutely felt the same way. And it's like when we first talked, it was very early in the publication process for me. So I wasn't really used to talking about the book particularly. And
Yeah.
I guess, although on one level I knew that it covered a lot of ground, it wasn't really until I got a bit of perspective on the project that I realized quite how much ground it covers. So I mean, we talked for an hour, and we could have talked for more. But it's although I write about 6 years, it's quite an eventful 6 years, within this genre. So it covers a huge amount of ground.
Have you had any part during the whole book tour process where you sort of had to like feed the interviewer questions or anything, where it was just sort of like awkward and weird, or has it all been just like go, go, go?
Actually, it's all been pretty good, I think.
That's awesome.
Like, I don't think I've been put into a situation where, I've been talking to someone who had no clue, about what the book was, or about who I was and how it all fitted together. So I've been really lucky. So I haven't done that many events, but the ones that I have done, so I did one with Martin. There's a guy called Paul Taylor, who is one of the sort of senior guys at Mute Records. And he's a friend of mine, and I did the Rock and Roll Book Club in Walthamstow in London, and they have a sort of series of events with music writers, who've written books, and that's basically what they do. They are a rock and roll book club. Paul was the interviewer for that, and he prepared it, beautifully. So it just kind of flowed, which was wonderful. Yeah.
If we can go into, looks like a couple questions that I wanted to ask you from last time that I didn't get to ask you this time. I was reviewing the podcast actually yesterday, just thinking like, this is so great, but I had more questions. And one of the things that I was, and maybe not a question, but just sort of a statement, we were talking about how many genres that influence that electronic kind of sound. But I don't think we might have touched upon it, but we didn't really mention funk as much as like we did punk, or maybe even goth, or dance and stuff like that. But funk to me was something that really you can hear in so many of the bands, like Duran Duran, like in John Taylor's bass playing, in Alison Moyet's voice. I feel like in Spandau Ballet, especially early Spandau Ballet, Human League. I think there's just a lot of that kind of funk influence. And I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong if you don't think so, but that was something that I just was thinking about.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. You're absolutely right. And it is something that doesn't really get talked about very much. But I think it's the generation of musicians that I write about in the book, that sort of immediate post-punk set of people. I think that their listening habits were really broad. I think that they were sort of almost like the first generation to not be coming through with a very narrow view, having been forced into, and it's like you are a rocker, or you are a mod, or you like disco, but you can't like anything else. And it feels like this generation was kind of the first to sort of say, actually, I can like whatever I want, and it's like, I'm going to take something from here and I'm going to take something from there. And, it's like, and if you don't like it, then that's your problem and not mine. And I think, part of that sort of, attitude comes out of punk. But all of a sudden it just felt like it was okay, to say that, Parliament Funkadelic was a big part of my record collection, and that did feed into the first two Human League albums. It's like, and there's so many of the sort of the disco records, it's a slightly different, it's a bit of a swerve from the sort of the pure funk. But, so much of that funk went into disco, and then sort of became, sort of went through a shining machine, and was, the production was upped and everything was polished, and it just sort of came out, sounding very precise and electronic and glossy.
Yeah. And there was a great quote, I think Phil Oakey was saying that, Martin Rushent really, he knew what pop was, and he could take crazy sounds and put them into a place where he made them into pop, So like that was something that I thought was really interesting too, because he could take pieces of things and just make them into this great 3-minute pop song.
No, Martin Rusham was kind of a genius, I think,
Yeah.
in this. And it's like it's almost, with everything that he touched, because he did so much as an interesting character who comes out of the book, and he is definitely one of them. But I think that there's not really enough out there about him. I think the fact that he was so successful with not only the Human League but also with Buzzcocks, with the Stranglers, with the Go-Go's, it's like to be dipping in and out of all those things and experiencing the sort of same level of respect and acknowledgement and success, is kind of extraordinary. And it's like, I think, like funk wasn't a dirty word, pop wasn't a dirty word either. And it's like when I sort of sat down to write the book, I was sort of quite clear in my head that the word pop had to be in the title or the subtitle somewhere, because that was a really important aspect that I kind of wanted. As much as I wanted to write about Cabaret Voltaire, I also wanted to be writing about Duran Duran, because from my personal perspective, they were all equal. It's like although one was more fashionable perhaps and one was more credible perhaps, then but their influence on me as a fan of music was the same. And it's like they were all great.
When we're talking about the influences on these artists, let's talk about the radio landscape at that time, because I feel like it's drastically different in the UK than it is here in the States. Because in the States, I feel like the radio market is so much more fractured, because you'll have country and western stations, and you'll have R&B stations and rock stations and classic rock stations that don't play new music from even classic rock artists. And in the Midwest, it'll be different than it is on the East Coast or the West Coast. So with a slightly more limited radio presence in the UK, and then you add in the factors of like the pirate radio stations, how do you think that affected the artists that were coming up and starting the electronic movement?
I think, to be honest, the electronic movement couldn't have developed in the way it did without it. I think that the great thing about the UK is that it's tiny. In all sort of relative comparisons, and yet it's sort of bats above its average, to such an extraordinary degree with music. And I think that that's partly because of exactly what you've been talking about. I think it was in the UK, because we're small, because we didn't have, in that time we didn't have specialist radio stations. It's like a radio station was just a radio station, and it almost always kind of played everything. It's like there might have been like a classical music station, there might have been a jazz station, but if it was pop, then it was everything from from punk to funk, the entire spectrum. And because of that, it's like if you were played, then you're exposed to sort of a massive audience straight away. And it wasn't like that little niche audience of people who, it's like I identify as an electronic music fan, and therefore I'm only going to listen to the electronic music fan channel.
Yeah.
It's like people were just thinking, actually, that Duran Duran song or that Human League song, it's like I didn't think it was my thing, but wow, what a great sound. And I think without the sort of that sort of parochial, geographic thing, then those bands would not have got onto the step that they needed to then go to other countries and become, become the sensations they were. And I think that also sort of the example of that moving into the USA is MTV. Which did start off as kind of like a sort of a very broad church of musical interests, but it kind of also had to have a video. So it had to be a certain sort of artist who were making videos. And this particular generation of people, were very interested in the visual side of how they presented themselves. But, it's like you can sort of chart MTV coming out of New Jersey and New York, before it became sort of a national thing, and just sort of watching that same thing again, in a sort of an American context.
And I think Rob will have to say a lot about this, but college radio as well, and having that broad spectrum of whatever they would play, rather than a little nutshell of a, like, I'm just going to play pop music or like, disco or whatever, right, Rob? Obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it too, but I also think you can't underestimate clubs either.
Clubs, yeah,
because
100%.
I really think that a lot of it got onto college radio because people heard it in clubs.
Yeah.
Because even at that time, there was still a stigma about sort of electronic music in the States at that time, right? And this is one of the things I love about Richard's book, is it sort of demystifies that. So if someone is just into like a particular genre of music in that particular time, this sort of puts it in the context and sort of plants its flag as, hey, electronic music is real. It's not like fake music by robots.
Yep.
Which is kind of a weird stigma that some of this stuff has. It's like people just dismiss it as like, oh, it's too experimental, or it's too weird, or, it's not real music because there's keyboards. I think that for something that is sort of synthetic and glossy, it kind of gives it a soul. And some of that soul is the funky bass lines and some of the stuff you hear from the Northern Soul records that obviously some of these people listen to as well. So I think that's part of it. I think you get, these records that are in clubs, you get them import bins at record stores. I know this is the time of my life where like I'm broke because everything is an import.
I know, me too.
Never underestimate either the power of the 12-inch single at this time, especially kind of more in the 80s and the 70s. But then this might be more of a thing, Richard, after your book sort of time span came. But like I sort of remember in 82 and 83 starting to buy 12-inch singles.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. I have to say that it's like as soon as I heard the concept of college radio in America, I was incredibly jealous, because that just sounded like the best thing that you could possibly tune into. It's like, and actually it turned out it was.
Yeah.
And actually, even here in the UK now, radio is still not really that. It's like there is a couple of stations, fairly mainstream stations that will play alternative music. But it hasn't really been until the sort of the breakdown, the democratization provided by the internet, and people setting up their own radio stations, or just, not even radio stations, just someone just playing some music because they love it.
Well, right.
Yeah, that I've been able to sort of, find that equivalent, that I have access to.
I think in the early times of alternative radio, if you're thinking about something like WLIR, which was something that was a station near me, they had a very broad playlist. So, you would hear Adam Ant, you'd hear the Human League, you'd hear Elvis Costello, you would hear Joy Division, you would hear, you know what I mean? So it would be like, yes, they're alternative, but they have a very wide list of things they're going to play. And I think over time, I think it shrunk and shrunk and shrunk in terms of what alternative radio, commercial alternative radio has become. So they were almost more like college-y in the beginning as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because the first time I came to America was in 1988. And I was at university at the time, and I came to work at a summer camp. And the summer camp was in rural Connecticut. It was very beautiful, very lovely part of the world. And it's like it just, the timing just kind of meshed. And it's like I was teaching kids who were, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And their music tastes were so great in a way that generation of young people in the UK just wouldn't have been. And it was because of college radio and MTV. It's like it was just they were like the coolest kids that I could have expected to talk to. Because I was at that time a sort of the height of my sort of Depeche Mode obsession. It's like we just had this thing in common, and straight away it was like a brilliant sort of connection between the two countries. And it's like as Rob said, talking about 12-inch singles, it's like being in America. All of a sudden, there's different 12-inch singles to the ones I've already got, and as we all know, that way madness lies.
Oh, it does. My collection of Duran Duran 12-inch singles is like 3 inches wide, you know. I don't really need them all.
I was embarrassed the other day to realize that I have an entire crate of just blancmange and soft cell singles. And then I think all of my Pet Shop Boys stuff is like 500 crates of stuff. It's like, stop it. This is obnoxious. I wanted to ask you, Richard, now that the book is done and it's out in the world and, you sort of distance yourself from it, are you sort of now, upon hindsight, going, man, I wish I would have put this artist in the book, or, oh, I wish I would have known about these guys? Or you just sort of reconciled with, I got enough. I don't need to be this complete.
I'm kind of a combination of both those things. So it's like, basically, it's like, obviously I know, it's like the book is out there, it's done. It's like whatever isn't in there or is in there is kind of fixed for eternity. And I kind of have to be fine with that, because otherwise it would drive me just crazy. But yeah, I think that if I was to do the whole project again, then I would probably do it slightly differently. It's like there are bands. I'm very aware that there are bands that I actually did write about for the book, but the publisher had to cut my words down and down and down, and it's like I was just slashing stuff,
Yeah.
With tiny sort of turnaround times. I was, just sort of going in with a sort of machete and just sort of, thinking, I didn't like that band very much, so they're out. It's like, whether they were important or not, I just didn't like them. And so there are a sort of scattering of electronic bands, on the cutting room floor of the book. And it would have been maybe nice to have brought them in at least a little bit, because with some of them, it's like I just kind of removed all references to them. So it's as if they never existed. And a couple of times people have said to me, Richard, it's like, there's no mention of X band or Y band. Why is that? Because they're my favorite band. And I don't want to say, well, they weren't my favorite band, and I just flashed them out.
Well, on that, was there any thought of doing like those kind of revisions when the paperback came out? Like, was there any thought of adding in an extra chapter or something like that?
I think that the publisher had been pushed as far as they were going to be pushed as to how much content I was allowed to include in the book. So it didn't feel like there was an opportunity for that. And actually, I'm kind of relieved, because that way I didn't have to make those decisions. I didn't I didn't have to do the work.
Yeah.
So yes.
Well, you said last time that you had been writing the book in your head for like 3 years before you even put, a pen to paper. And so do you ever think about doing another book, or maybe a continuation of this book, or do you even have the energy for that? Because I know the research you did for this book was so incredible and so intense and so time consuming.
Yes, yeah, it was just crazy. It's like, and I think that if I'd known how hard it would have been to write before I started doing anything, I probably just wouldn't have bothered. Several people have asked me, it's like, will you do a sort of a sequel? It's like, will you do a 1983 to 1988 or whatever it is? And although I kind of would love to, when I actually sort of sat down to start thinking about it, it's kind of impossible, because by that stage, everything is electronic. And it's like, I just sort of looking at these, these sort of rough lists that I scribbled down and thinking, it's like, do you include, I don't know, Tina Turner, because there's so much synth, in the Private Dancer album, but kind of can't include everything. And it just became like an impossible task, I think. It's like by 1983, everything was starting to be electronic, but by 1984, 85, everything was electronic, and it just felt like an impossible task to sort of, to try and unwind, that particular sort of, ball of knots.
If it wasn't an electronic book, though, do you have any other kind of, seeds of ideas that might be a different topic altogether?
Well, my publisher, Omnibus Press, they said, they came to me and they said, would you like to write another book? And I said, "Oh, maybe I would." And they said, "Well, have you got any ideas?" I said, "Well, I haven't really at the moment, but let me think about it, and I'll come back to you." And I did think about it, and I had a meeting with the main guy at Omnibus. We went to the pub, and he said, "So, have you got any ideas for any new books? Because we'd love to publish you again." And I said, "Okay, I've got 4 ideas." And I said, idea 1, idea 2, idea 3, idea 4. And he said, "I like all of them, but I particularly like that one." And so basically, I'm writing a book about that one.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay. That one,
and-
we'll have to just know what it is. That one.
Yeah, well, the deal isn't quite done yet. So they basically said, yes, there's a book here, and you need to go away and sort of flesh the idea out. And the book is about some people. The people, you kind of need to talk to the people. And so I had to go and do all of that. And now we're just sort of at the point where they're about to sort of, put a contract together. And once the contract is signed, I feel I can talk about it. But until then,
That's
I feel
great.
a bit superstitious about talking about what it is in case the whole thing falls apart and,
Yes.
sort of
Right.
comes back to bite me.
Well,
Of course.
well, you heard it here first. It's about that one, and we'll know
Right.
more soon. That's
And
great.
that also means that that's an opportunity for us to have you on our show
Well,
a third time.
Absolutely, and I very, very much look forward to that. And it's a book that will appeal, I think, to the same people that listening to the music the machines make appeal to. It kind of felt like, having done all the work to sort of build up this sort of brand, if you like, then it made sense to sort of write some more in that direction. So it's in that direction.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it's like,
All right.
I'm currently in my favorite stage, which is the sort of meticulous research stage, because that just always feels like a privilege. It's like having a reason to sort of sit down and read about all this stuff, that other people have written, and to go through the music press at the time just feels like a treat. It's the next bit that sort of offers more of a challenge.
All right, Richard, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here.
Okay.
If someone were wanting to hear for themselves, I think you have a playlist that goes along with the book, but if someone were to like really go in and explore, what do you think are the 10 most important songs or albums that somebody can listen to the origin of this music and the evolution of it?
Okay. So first of all, I have to say that this is the impossible question.
Yeah.
Because,
Of course.
how can you possibly, distill this down, into 10 things? So I'm going to start with The Human League's Being Boiled, because when I sat down to write the book, in my head, that was the first of the records that I particularly wanted to include.
Yeah.
At that time, I thought it was the first, but my research subsequently told me that actually the Normal and Warm Leatherette TVOD was earlier than that, but only by a little tiny bit. So I'm going to go with The Human League's Being Boiled, and then I'm going to go with Our Friends Electric by Chubayami Gary Newman, and then I'll need something from Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark. So I think I'm going to have to go Messages. How many have I done?
3.
I've already done 4.
I'm counting. Messages. That's great. Love it.
Yeah, that's a good.
Yeah, it's interesting you picked Messages.
And then, so that takes us into sort of 1979. So I'm going to sort of throw a couple of things in that are a little bit different. So I'm going to put in Sparks.
Yes.
And so that would have to be the Giorgio Moroder Sparks
Yeah.
one, because that allows me to sort of bring him in as well.
I'm glad you brought up the Sparks, because it saved me from having to bring it up.
Yeah, so Sparks is like one of those ones that everyone knows, but no one necessarily sort of puts in with these. You don't necessarily pair
Right.
Sparks, with Throbbing Gristle.
Right.
And yeah,
Right.
I think there's a case to be made. So yes, so Sparks, Japan. I would have to probably put a Japan song in, an Ultravox Tracks. I've already reduced it from tracks to bands.
That's okay.
It's like I feel that there should be something there from Soft Cell.
7,
Should be something there from Telex.
8,
Yes.
New Order, Simple
9,
Minds,
10.
Kraftwerk.
Oh, you got
I was
11.
going to say, don't leave out Kraftwerk.
I haven't even got to Depeche Mode yet.
No, that's true.
So impossible task. But I think that
Of course.
the sort of the setting of the question kind of illustrates the sort of the point that I was making about how broad this particular church of music is, and
Yes.
how insane you would have to be to try and encapsulate it into some sort of a book.
Right. Right.
Yeah, you did it. So, the last time the last time you were on, we were talking about, obviously, and this time how much videos made a difference. And now, of course, anyone can make a video and put anything out. So I just wanted to know if you see it as sort of like a positive or a negative thing that just anybody could put anything out anywhere now. What do you think about that?
I suspect that I'm going to answer this like I answer all the questions. I'm sort of in both camps at the same time. So I used to work at MTV back in the 90s. So I worked for MTV Europe. And in that time, my job there was I was senior manager of talent and music. So it was the department that sort of was contacted by and contacted the music industry to get the videos and the artists in and to get the shows and everything out. So my job was kind of to coordinate the booking of artists for the channel. And also to do things like I was on the playlist committee, which was great fun.
That I was promotion, right, for videos.
I did know that. Yes.
Yeah.
I think we talked
Or for the US. Yeah. Okay.
So this was in the mid 90s, when MTV was still fairly new in Europe. So because of my job, I used to sort of be put into industry situations where sometimes new bands or people who with aspirations to work in the music industry would sort of sit down with people and ask about their jobs. And they said, it's like, I'm in a band, it's like, if we make a video, then would MTV show it? And in that role, I would always say to them, don't make a video, because videos are really, really expensive. And even if MTV was to play it, they'd probably only play it once at midnight. And you've spent all that money, to sort of, to basically show your video to, a couple of people in Belgium who happen to be, still up after the pub. So it's like there's better ways of spending your money, at the starting point of being in a band than creating a video. And now, of course, like you say, it's like anyone can make a video because, the technology is in everyone's pocket. And I would probably still say, don't make a video because everyone makes a video. So it's not special at all. And to make it special, you have to have something, intangible about it. And that's kind of, the sort of the magic that you can't plan for. It just kind of comes through. But it's like you're not going to be the first person to make a video on an iPhone, because someone else has already done that. It's like it's like kind of everything has been explored and everything has started to look the same. As a result, that sort of just makes the sort of videos used to be so exciting. It's like, and because they were sort of a little bit distant from you. It's like in the UK you had to sort of kind of watch Top of the Pops on a Thursday night, 7:30. And to see the latest videos being sort of being broadcast, and that made them exciting and momentous and and revolutionary. It's like seeing, I don't know, Talking Heads, Road to Nowhere, or wherever it was, because they made great videos and they were so weird and so unusual, and it's like that you would talk about them the next day for the next week until the new video comes in that sort of takes over from it. But there isn't that excitement anymore. So I think that to capture, if you have a way of capturing that magic, and that you can do it, then maybe. But actually, videos, they're kind of just noise. in the sort of in the clamor of people wanting attention, and I don't really know how that sort of sits. It doesn't sort of sit well with me. And I suspect that we're about to have another wave of AI videos, which is kind of going to be a whole new clamor, and it's like for a while they'll probably be quite interesting, and then very, very quickly, everyone will catch up with the ideas and the technology, and that they will start to look the same again as well.
And it's interesting too, because the use of AI now and journalism, a lot of the attitudes that people have about that kind of mirror the attitudes that people had in the early 80s with making music with synthesizers and samplers.
Yes. Yeah. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Yeah. It's like this sort of distrust of technology. And it's like, I think there's a fantastic documentary called Synth Britannia, which was made by the BBC probably 10, 15 years ago. And it kind of rounds up the whole scene. It's kind of the documentary version of my book, and it's fantastic. There's a great bit in the Synth Britannia documentary where Andy McCluskey from Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark is talking about this sort of resistance to synthesizer electronic made music, because people say, well, surely the machines do the work for you. You just have to press the button. And he's just like, if there was a button that said hit records, then, it's like, I would be pressing it, everyone would be pressing it, all the records would sound the same, but there isn't, it's like, that isn't the way it is. And I suspect that the sort of the shiny, tantalizing appeal of AI will kind of be that again. But I suspect only really briefly.
I think that there's like a little more reason for worry about AI rather than over synthesizers, but in a much more broad way, obviously.
Yes.
But anyway, that's a whole other discussion.
Richard, I guess the other thing too that I love about the book, and that, as much as I grew to this stuff when I was young and still love it, I didn't really I kind of always thought, okay, Kraftwerk, and that was kind of it. But I never really sort of grasped the whole DIY aspect of this stuff. I guess, a lot of people in America just think, oh, they just went out to the shop and bought keyboards and made it. They didn't realize that they're like plugging in different bits and pieces of things and rewiring stuff, right? I don't think people really get that.
Well, that's fantastic, because I think that's a really, really important part of this story, is that you're kind of putting tools into the hands of people who really don't know how to use them. And therefore, they're not using them in the conventional way. They're just sort of like switching them on and just sort of jabbing at the buttons to see what comes out. And it's like what happens if I join that to that, and if I, it's like I've got that guitar pedal from the time that I thought I was going to be a guitarist. What if I plug my synthesizer into the guitar pedal, and sort of change the sound that way? And I think without those things, then synthesizers would sort of have gone in the same direction as they were already in at the start of my book. So in 1978, prior to that, they were kind of the preserve of the superstar groups, the Emerson, Lake and Palmers, who could afford the technology and were playing the kind of music that was virtuoso and fancy and intellectual and clever. And could only be done by people who had studied, piano for 100 years, before they were allowed to sort of present anything in public. Whereas all of a sudden this sort of, this post-punk generation, we're just like, well, actually, it's like I didn't do my 100 years of piano practice. It's like I've never played a piano in my life, and yet this synthesizer allows me to make these really cool noises. And I think that the bottom line of my book is, it's like these people made really cool noises.
That's a great summation. It really is.
Has writing the book changed how you listen to music now?
Oh, great question. I think it has, because when I went through the process of doing the book, I listened to everything that I write about, and because I did that process, because it felt important to sort of at least sort of go through it while I was writing it. So, I was kind of close to how it sounded. Lots of those things weren't really on my radar previously. So writing the book has kind of broadened my tastes in a way, which is great. So it's like, for example, I'd never really listened to Yellow before. And it's like, it turns out Yellow are fantastic. So for the first few months after doing the book, it's like all I listened to was Yellow. It's like that sort of happened again and again and again. But on a sort of a more negative way, there are certain records now that I've kind of got too close to, that I kind of need to put to one side and not listen to again for a while, because, they're the sort of the ubiquitous ones. You get those, it's almost certainly the same in America, but, in the UK, there's a certain CD compilation that you could only really buy in petrol stations, and really, really sort of like rubbish outlets, and it would be, the best of synth pop, 80s. And it would have, if you're lucky, it would be original versions, but if you were unlucky, it'll be, someone's cover versions of, the biggest synth pop, records of the 80s, and it kind of felt like, I was starting to get into that territory with some bands, and some bands that I absolutely love, who I kind of just needed to put to one side for a bit and not listen to. So a little bit of both. And it was also a time, for a short time, where I kind of didn't listen to electronic music at all. It's like I just sort of listened to other stuff, for a while, and it's like, at the end of the year, you get your Spotify, roundup, and everyone, so what's in your Spotify roundup? It's like, who's your number one band? Well, actually, it's The Cure. It's always The Cure, because they are my favorite band, but then it's like second was Smokey Robinson and third was Buddy Holly, so it's like, for a while I was just sort of, taking everything in a different direction.
Yeah.
So once you got into the mode of writing the book, and even after that, do you find that it's harder to turn off the analytical side of your brain when you're listening to music? Is it harder to listen just for pleasure?
I don't think so. No, I think the music is still the pleasure that it always was, and there's kind of a reason for that, but it's such a big conversation that it's too much for right now. But there's this thing called Aphantasia, and I don't know if any of you have come across it at all, but it means that the people who have Aphantasia means I don't have a visual imagination. So if you say to me, think of an apple, I don't see a picture of an apple. All I have is knowledge of what an apple is. And apparently that's weird. And I had no idea for like 50 years. And
wow.
the people could actually see pictures of apples in their heads. And ditto with music. It's like I can't recreate music in my head. So if you were to say, it's like, how does Kraftwerk's The Model sound? It's like I would probably remember some of the words, but I couldn't hear it in my head. It's like I wouldn't know how that song kind of went. So when I listen to music, every time is kind of like the first time. So it's like
that's awesome in a way.
I'm familiar with certain songs, and I know how they're going to go, and I know what's going to come next, and I know that's a great bit. But because I can't recreate it for myself in a situation when I'm not actively plugging into music, means that it's kind of magic every time.
That's just so interesting. I've never heard of that, and that is wild.
I've heard of this, but only in the sense of people who aren't able to visualize in their head. And I have a friend who has this and doesn't, if you say the word star, doesn't picture a star in her head.
Yeah.
But I've never heard this in relation to music before. That is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's like it's kind of a new thing that they've sort of neuroscientists, only kind of came across it, in the last 10 years or something. So it's quite small. Mm-hmm. Apparently, it's like a 2% or a 3% chance that you experience the world in this way. But it's not like a black and white thing. It's like a whole spectrum. So it's like everyone who has it to a different degree. And
right.
Like some people can do this thing, but not that thing. And some people can, remember that, but, and recreate that, but not that. But in my case, then, with music, and I suspect now that that's why music is so important to me and always has been, is that, it's like every time I come to it, it's new.
That's amazing.
So yeah, like I said, it's a really big topic to sort of suddenly throw in, in the last couple of
Right.
months. But
We're having you on for the 4th time. It's a new book, and then this.
I really didn't think that it was going to be that big an answer.
Yeah.
It's super interesting, and I'd love to hear more. So we've come to an hour yet again, and I'm so glad that we were able to have you back on so we could get that second hour, and I can't wait to talk to you next time.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to see you all again. Thank you so much. It's like you're so easy to sort of come into a room with and have this conversation with. It's like, and we don't really know each other. We've not met in real life, but it's kind of like sitting around the table in a pub and just having a great time. It's
feel the same way with
really
you.
enjoyable thing to do. So thank you.
There's our footnote for our PR right there.
Yeah, we love you. We are so happy to have you, Richard. It's great seeing you.
Yeah,
absolutely.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you.
So for listeners, we are next time going to be talking about the year 1994. We are going to be talking about the albums and the songs that came out in 1994. Can't wait for that. I've been planning this in my head for months now, and I'm super excited. Richard, thank you so much for joining us. It has been such a pleasure to have you again.
An absolute pleasure to be here. I've had another blast.
We will definitely see you again. We know we will.
Well, that's fantastic. It's like I will call on that as soon as the new book is in a position that can be talked about. So yeah, thanks.
Or if you just want to have an hour chat with us and about whatever you want, just let us know.
Fantastic.
You have an open invitation.
Even better. Thank you very, very much.
Stephanie, why don't you kick us off with where people can find you?
You can find me on Facebook at Stephanie Seymour Music. You can find me on Instagram at there_r_birds. And I have a website, therearebirds.com. And you can find me on Bandcamp under my name, Stephanie Seymour. And of course, on all these streaming platforms like Spotify and stuff like that.
All right, Anthony.
You can also find me on the Watchers in the Fourth Dimension podcast, watching our way through all of Doctor Who from 1963 until now. We are on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and all of those other places wherever you like to get your podcasts. And you can also follow us on social media at Watchers4D on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, or X, or whatever the fuck it's called this week.
Right.
And you can also find me personally on Instagram at Englishman in ATL.
Rob, how about you?
So you can find me on Facebook or the Twitter X planetary mess that is. Also on Post under my name. And you can find me on the radio on Wednesday nights on KDHX 88.1 FM in St. Louis. Streaming at kdhx.org. So you can listen to that on the archive stream whenever you want. It's there for you to listen to whenever. Also, I host a show on Louder Than More Radio on Monday nights from 6 to 8 Greenwich Mean Time. And then that's 1 to 3 Eastern, 12 to 2 Central. It's called Antics. You can listen to that there. And I'm also on the Weekend Justice podcast for needcoffee.com.
All right. And I've got a website that catches all of my nonsense in one place, and that is Cosmic Creative. KOZMIC creative.com. You can find my books. You can find my podcasts. And I don't know, maybe I'll put out a coloring book and you can find that there too. I don't know. So we will be back soon. Hope you'll stick around with us. Until then, take care, keep rocking on, and we'll see you soon.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping for the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.